right. Well, hi guys. How you guys doing tonight? I don't know how many people are coming here. I'm gonna record it so that I can post it on the page later and on Instagram and YouTube. So we're gonna get started right away. I hope you guys are doing well. And I'm so glad you're here with me. It's so weird. I just been back on Facebook for like 2 weeks and it's like crazy. I've been off of Facebook for 4 years. They kicked me off 4 years ago. And then I heard, people were being able to get pages back up again. And my daughter convinced me to go back on Facebook. In the last 2 weeks, it's crazy. Like I've done nothing but talk to people on Facebook. It's pretty cool. I I guess I miss it more than I realized. But anyway, I'm glad you're here. I've been doing stuff like this for the last 4 years, but I've been doing it all on YouTube. So I don't know if you guys are on my YouTube channel, Ursula Bielski's World of the Supernatural, but I've got like something like 150 videos on there that I've been doing for the past 4 years. And most of what I do now is very different from what I was doing before. I still do folklore and history of the supernatural, but a lot of what I do now is warning people about some methods of investigating the supernatural that can be very dangerous, as I found out myself. So I do have a lot of different things on YouTube in that vein. I have a series called This Present Darkness on there where I have interviews and I do my own shows and stuff like that about that topic specifically. But I continue to investigate the paranormal constantly and to help families and businesses, individuals with their issues with paranormal problems that they're having. And it's crazy. I'm going into my 36th year as a paranormal investigator. So it's been wild. And tonight I wanted to just go back kind of to some of my beginnings and talk about some of the most famous Christmas ghost stories in Chicago. And when I was looking at these, it was interesting because a lot of these stories we actually discovered. We didn't like these stories weren't known when I first started doing investigations, and it was only in talking to people and investigating that I discovered them. So it's kind of cool. Yeah, the last 4 years I've done a lot. Most of what I've done is not Chicago. So revisiting Chicago stories is like coming home, sort of. I'm still living in Chicago, probably not for much longer. I'll still probably live in Illinois, but man, it's been a long time. And I'll talk more about that this evening as well. All right, I've got a few slides I'm going to share with you. So I'm just going to go here and I'm going to make sure that I'm sharing the screen. Share screen. Okay. So let me know if you can see my slides, or if you can't see my slides, just let me know. So you should be seeing a green photo right now on the screen. You guys can see that okay, right? Okay, cool. All right. Probably the most famous, we're going to talk about some famous and not so much famous ghost stories here in Chicago. Ghost stories and Christmas began to be sort of a match, something that was a thing probably around Charles Dickens's time, because of course he wrote the great story A Christmas Carol, and then many other people began writing ghost stories that had a Christmas theme. And the BBC in the UK, they started doing a series of Christmas ghost stories that they would air on Christmas Eve. And I don't know if you guys have been following me for a long time, but about 5 years ago, I actually traveled to England to film a documentary about one of the most famous ghost stories in England, which was A Warning to the Curious, and one of the most famous ghost story writers, M.R. James. And I'm going to put a link to that next week on my Facebook page, so you guys can watch that documentary that we did with Chris Halton for free. It was really cool to go to those locations in England. But most of the ghost stories, the Christmas ghost stories that you hear, They're sweet stories. They were like spooky little cozy stories. Most of our Christmas ghost stories in Chicago are not cozy or sweet ghost stories. They're harrowing, awful, terrible stories. But that's what we have. These are the stories that we always remember this time of year because they're so ingrained in our memory in Chicago. So our collective memory, when Thanksgiving comes and the snow starts to fall and we start to get ready for Christmas, we can't block these memories out. They are so much a part of us. And so I think it's really important for us to remember, even though it may not be the coziest thing, I think it's really important for us to remember these stories. Now, I'm going to start with probably the cutest, coziest ghost story of tonight, just to give us a little happy kind of kickoff, even though this isn't a happy story either. It's probably the most sort of traditional kind of, sort of romantic ghost story. And that's the story of the famous Christmas tree ship in Chicago. In Chicago, every year, the Christmas trees, and I don't know if you guys know this, but the first Christmas trees in the United States were at the barracks at Fort Dearborn in Chicago. They weren't in colonial times on the East Coast. They were brought to the barracks in Chicago during the early 1800s because the German American soldiers that were stationed at Fort Dearborn had this tradition of the Christmas tree that they brought with them from Germany. So it's pretty cool, right? At any rate, Chicago was a place where, like a lot of other places on the Great Lakes, Christmas trees would be brought in on the Christmas tree ships. And every early December after Thanksgiving, everybody would be eagerly awaiting the arrival of the Christmas tree ships from Wisconsin and Michigan to bring these beautiful evergreen trees to be used as decorations in the houses, right? So one of these trees, one of these ships was the Rue Simmons. It was a famous Christmas tree ship. And every year it would dock in Chicago along the river and bring in these loads of Christmas trees from Michigan and Wisconsin. And the captain of the Christmas tree ship was this gentleman in the middle, Captain Herman Schaineman. And in 1920, he was, as usual, with his crew, bringing this load of Christmas trees into Chicago when there was a terrible storm that broke out on the lake. And there were several ships that saw the Rue Simmons with its distress signal flying, but the ship was going really fast. And none of the other ships that saw them in distress could catch up to them. And into nowhere, the Rue Simmons just vanished. And it wasn't until the 1970s that the Rue Simmons was found by a diver that was diving off the coast of Wisconsin. And he was looking for another wreck, but he found this wreck and he knew immediately that this was not the ship he was looking for. This was the Rue Simmons because the Christmas trees were still on board. You can see this is one of the many pictures that were taken by that diver after the discovery of the ship. In fact, if you go up to Two Rivers, Wisconsin, the Historical Society has, I think it's like so cool. I cry when I talk about it. They actually have one of the Christmas trees from the ship that they decorate for Christmas. So it's pretty cool. This is one of the, I guess, you might say one of the, like I said, one of the more romantic and like cozy Christmas stories in Chicago. We don't have a lot of those. But the story of Captain Schaineman and the Christmas tree ship is one that's still told. There was a play that was created from it at the Looking Glass Theater. That's David Schwimmer's theater from Friends. There have been several children's books, beautifully illustrated children's books about it. A lot of documentaries about it. So it really captures the imagination of people. But the way that I learned about the Christmas tree ship, of course, was through the ghost stories. And that was that of course, none of the crew was ever found from the Christmas tree ship. Captain Schaineman's wallet washed up somewhere years after he wrote his last note in the captain's log, everyone's lost. And that was pretty much it. They found some artifacts from the ship. Of course, they found the ship sunken, which is still down there. I believe the ship's wheel is at the yacht club in Milwaukee. But I think the best souvenirs of the Christmas tree ship are the ghostly ones, because every year in early December, around the same time that the Rue Simmons used to dock in Chicago, they say that people walking by the river where the ship used to dock will smell the scent of Christmas trees at that location. The grave of Herman Schademann's wife in Acacia Park Cemetery on the far west side of Chicago, they say that site too is one where this time of year, even though there's no evergreen trees around the grave, that people visiting loved ones in that area will smell this strong, overpowering scent of pine needles. So a very, like I said, a cozy, romantic ghost story for Christmas. Another one that's not so terrible as the ones to come is the story of the I've got someone in the chat. I want to make sure no one's having trouble here. Okay, cool. This is another story that I learned about a long time ago, and this one I actually learned about firsthand. Hold on one sec. This is a story that I learned about firsthand growing up here in Chicago. I grew up in this neighborhood where I still live on the northwest side of Chicago, and I live around Irving Park and Western. And in the 1980s, when my brother and I were in high school, my brother was attending St. Ignatius College Prep High School. That's this building right here, right next door to Holy Family Church. This is Roosevelt Road right here. This is the near west side. And this parish of Holy Family led to the building of many schools and other buildings like convents and stuff in the area. And St. Ignatius College Prep, what the building is today, was originally Loyola University. So this was the first location of Loyola University. This whole complex was going to be torn down in the 1980s. The neighborhood had changed drastically from mostly like Irish immigrants. This was like a big like Irish immigrant area, and Italian immigrant area. So like a lot of mostly Catholics. Everyone was Catholic in the area. But by the 1980s, it had completely changed. It was mostly African Americans living in the area, and there was almost no one attending the school and almost no one as a parishioner of the church. So the Archdiocese of Chicago is going to tear all of these buildings down. And there were donations that poured in from all over the world to save these structures. At that time, my brother was attending school at St. Ignatius, and he was part of, all the students had to be part of a fundraising drive that was going on. And they were, because there was no money from the Archdiocese that was going to go to save these structures, they had to raise all of the money themselves from alumni and other donors. So the students would take turns staying after school to call potential donors in a phone, fundraising room that they had set up in the old library on the top floor. That was the fourth floor, which was up here, kind of like the attic area, right? This is what it looks like now. It's one of the most prestigious schools in the country. And I don't even know how much money they have in their budget every year, millions and millions and millions of dollars, right? All of the top echelon of Chicago Catholics go to the school, politicians. And when my brother was in school, Bill Curtis, his daughter went there. And he was like one of the little ones, but politicians and lawmakers and, raiders and everyone, their kids all go here. So they call the school, they nickname the school Hogwarts. As you can see, it looks like that, right? But this library at that time in the 1980s was, I mean, it was falling apart like the rest of the building. The school was built 12 years before the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. So by this time, the 1980s, everything was literally falling apart. The floors were falling in. It was all the original wiring, all the original plumbing. Everything had to be ripped out, totally gutted and redone. And so it was during this time that my brother was working on one of these fundraising drives, right, on the what would later become the library. And what they would do is they would lock all the kids inside at night because it's a very dangerous neighborhood at the time with a lot of crime going on. And they would enable this, state-of-the-art alarm system that had been installed. Well, little known to my brother, every night after the kids all went home at around 10:30, and the bookkeepers would stay to do the books for the fundraising for the evening, every single night they would see things out of the corner of their eyes. The lights would go on and off. They would hear footsteps, and they would feel constantly they were being watched. Well, this one night my brother was working there. He said it was about a half hour before they were done, like 10 o'clock at night. He decided to go out in the hallway to get a drink of water. So he opened up the library door, and it's all pitch black outside in the hallway. And as he opened up the library door, he saw this classroom door open, and this priest comes out, and he's dressed in a long cassock, the long black robe, down to the floor with a crucifix around his neck. And there were many priests that were on the staff at the school teaching, and there were priests that were, that were at the church next door. And all the students knew all of these priests very well. But my brother didn't recognize this priest. And there should have been nobody else in the building because all the students, and their managers had been locked in when they started the fundraising that night. So my brother went back into the library, and he told the supervisor there's someone out in the school. And he said the person that he told that he just saw the color drain from his face, because little did my brother know that this kind of thing had gone on every night for like 2 weeks. So the supervisor called the caretaker of the school, who came over from the rectory with his master key. He disabled the alarm system, came into the school, and they went to the room where my brother had seen this priest go into what he thought would have been a locked classroom and close the door behind him. Well, when the caretaker got to the door, it was locked. He used his master key to open up the door, and my brother said they all almost fell into the classroom below them because the entire floor of this classroom where this priest had gone in had been ripped out for the renovation. There was nowhere this priest could have gone. Well, the next day, my brother told his Latin teacher, one of the brothers on staff, what he had seen the night before. And the brother just laughed and said, "Oh, you saw Arnie." He and all of the other priests and brothers on the staff at St. Ignatius had known then, and had known for almost 100 years, that Father Arnold Damon, the Jesuit Belgian missionary who had started the school and the church 12 years before the Great Chicago Fire, was constantly still watching over the school and the church. And they told my brother that countless people had encountered him over the years, especially during times when the buildings were being renovated. Now, this was so interesting because this was 1985. My brother was a junior. I was a sophomore at St. Benedict School here in my neighborhood now, North Center. And he came home, and he sat on the edge of my bed. It was like midnight when he got home. And he said, Ursula, wake up. And I was like, what's going on? And he said, I think I just saw a ghost. And he told me the whole story about seeing Father Arnold Damon in that dark corridor. That was not by far like I said, the only time that anyone saw Father Damon's ghost. But even when he was alive, Father Damon was believed to have this sort of supernatural, divine sort of intervention about himself. And one of the most famous ghost stories in Chicago has to do with the Great Chicago Fire, when Father Arnold Damon was not even here, but he was in New York doing missionary work, and he was hearing confessions at St. Patrick's Church in Brooklyn when one of the other priests passed him a note, and it said, "Chicago is on fire, and it's coming right for your parish." Father Damon didn't get excited, didn't get upset. He finished hearing confessions, and then when his confessions were over, he went up to the altar, he lit 7 candles, and he knelt down on the altar in front of the tabernacle that held the Blessed Eucharist. And he looked up to a statue of the Blessed Mother, and he said, "Blessed Mother, if you save my parish and my parishioners, I promise I will go home to Chicago, and I will light 7 candles just like this, and I will keep them lit forever till the end of time." And sure enough, just as the Great Fire, was about to obliterate that neighborhood where Holy Family Church and the schools were that Father Damon had founded, the wind changed. And the fire did this little zigzag where all of those buildings, including the homes of the parishioners that had prayed with Father Damon to be saved from the fire, they were all spared. And true to his word, Father Damon got back to Chicago, and he lit 7 candles on the altar, and they were kept burning for years and years and years. And today you can still go to Holy Family and see 7 candles lit at the statue of our Blessed Mother. They're electric now, but they burn 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, true to the word of Father Damon, going back to the night of the Great Chicago Fire. Now, the Christmas story about Father Damon is the most astounding. Just before Christmas and just before his own death, Father Damon was lying in bed in the rectory at Holy Family Church when he suddenly sat up straight in bed, and he saw 2 of his altar boys standing at the foot of the bed, dressed in their robes and holding lighted candles like they were just about to serve at Mass. They didn't say anything to Father Damon, but he knew somehow that he was supposed to follow them. So he got up and put on his coat, and he followed these boys out of the rectory and through the snowy streets to this little rundown house in the neighborhood. And he recognized it as the home of these 2 boys. In the back bedroom of the house, he found the boy's mother very ill and close to death. And he realized that the boys had gotten to come and get the priest to give the last rites of the Catholic Church to their dying mother. So Father Damon blessed her. He sat and prayed with her. And then he told the boys, "If your mother's still alive in the morning, come and see me. Otherwise, we'll prepare for the funeral." So Father Damon went back to the rectory, went back to sleep, and in the morning he didn't remember anything that had happened the night before. But then the doorbell rang, and at the door was a neighbor of this woman who had died the night before, and she had come to get the priest to give last rites to her friend. But of course, Father Damon had already been there. And it was only at that moment that Father Damon remembered that these 2 boys, his altar boys, had drowned together the summer before at the church picnic. Father Damon was so moved by the love of these boys for their mother and their devotion to the Catholic faith that they came, even after death, to get the priest to make sure that their mother had a proper Catholic burial, that he had 2 beautiful wooden statues of the boys commissioned, and you can still see them up on either side of the altar at Holy Family Church, along with those 7 candles that Father Damon lighted that night that he got home from New York, the day after the Great Chicago Fire. I'm just going to check really quickly. I'm not sure if somebody is trying to get in here. Okay, I think we are good. Let me just make sure. One more place. Okay, we're good. All right. So I told you those were the nice stories. Now we get to the bad stuff, unfortunately. I don't know about you guys, but the night that John Wayne Gacy was arrested, 2 days before Christmas, that was my moment. I was 10 years old. Everybody has that moment when that innocence just flees from your life and it's never there again. And that was my moment. I remember that Christmas. I remember going, to my aunt's house, my grandma's house, the Christmas lights, the presents, the beautiful Christmas feast, beautiful mass, the nativity. And everything, my mind was on this scene right here that I had seen on the news, even though my mom tried to shield me from it. The arrest of John Wayne Gacy after killing all of these young men and boys in Chicago. This story is one that so many people ask about. Are there ghost stories related to John Wayne Gacy? And everybody wants to know if that house, the property, is haunted. There have been three houses on this property on Somerdale Avenue on the far northwest side of Chicago. This is right around Foster and Cumberland by O'Hare Airport. The first house, which Gacy lived in, killed in, and buried the bodies in, was torn down, of course, during the investigation. And if you guys have not seen the Netflix documentary, it's a 3-part documentary that was made last year about the Gacy murders. You've got to watch it. It's amazing. They have footage that no one has ever seen before, including footage of actually digging up the basement, and it's crazy. All kinds of interviews that have never been heard before. That house, of course, was completely torn down. They dug down 21 feet under the surface of the ground to make sure they got everything out. And then there was another house that was built on it. And there was a legend about that site after the house was torn down that nothing would grow on it. And in fact, there didn't seem to be any way for grass or even weeds to grow on this location. And of course, skeptics said that it was because of the lye or the lime that Gacy had used on the bodies that was preventing anything from growing. But like I said, they had actually dug down 21 feet. They removed all of the earth 21 feet down and put in all fresh topsoil. So this wasn't anything that had been there before, and yet nothing seemed to grow there. So that was the legend. So there was a second house that was built there, and then this house that you see here in the lower right-hand corner is the house that's there today. Of course, everyone says there's nothing going on here. It's not haunted, nothing happening. And, nobody really knows who lives in these places. No one talks to anybody that has lived in these places. I can't believe that there's nothing going on in these houses, but that's just me. What I do know is that there are a number of other really strange things that have gone on and continue to go on in relation, it seems, to the Gacy murders. Maybe about 10 years ago now, for my third Chicago Haunts book, I interviewed one of the deputy sheriffs from the Cook County Jail. And he told me, oh my gosh, so many stories about the Cook County Jail, which I put in that book and I've written about since. But one of the stories is about the courtroom where Gacy's trial was held. And he said that in that courtroom, from the time of Gacy's trial only, there was nothing going on in that room before that. But from the time of Gacy's trial, during the trial, people would report hearing the sound of children playing in the courtroom, like laughing and running around, like misbehaving in court. It's very strange on the surface, of course, just that's strange. But the strangest thing about it is that the youngest of Gacy's victims, these weren't children. The youngest one was 14 years old, and the others were later teenagers and young men. So these were not children, and yet it's children that are heard in the courtroom. It's almost like it's their lost innocence that's haunting the courtroom. There is another story that I found out about when I was doing my book, The Haunting of Joliet Prison, a few years ago. And of course, Gasey was held at Joliet Prison not once, but twice. When he was first arrested, he was there for about 30 days, as all prisoners were held there for about 30 days and processed and had medical evaluations, psychological evaluations. But he also went back there before his execution because he had a heart problem and he had to be well in order to be killed. So go figure. But at that time, when I was researching the book, I found out from my friend Robin Terry, who runs Ashmore Estates down in Southern Illinois. I don't know if any of you guys have been down there. It's near Charleston, Illinois. It's the old poor farm and hospital down there that's has a lot of active haunting activity going on, and it's a popular place for people to go and investigate. But Robin told me that he had come into possession of some of the furniture from the house where Gasey had committed the murders, including an armoire where he had kept a lot of his paintings. He would paint all those weird paintings. And it was locked. It was empty, but it was locked, and Robin couldn't get it open. But he put it in his place where he lives. And soon after he got it, he had a friend over for dinner. It was a woman who said that she was a psychic medium, so she could communicate with the dead, see them, hear them. And they had dinner, and then after dinner, Robin's friend said, "Robin, why is John Wayne Gacy here in your house?" And he said, "What?" And she said that he was angry because Robin had his paintings. Robin didn't have his paintings, but he had the armoire where Gacy kept his paintings. So pretty strange. This is one of the many stories that was completely unknown when I started investigating Chicago ghosts. And it was only after we started doing the ghost tours. And I specifically put this site on our ghost tours, even though the site's not haunted, because I just wanted people to know about what had happened here. This is the site of the old Iroquois Theater that was completed in 1903. Today, it's the Nederlander Theater. It's one of the many theaters in the Broadway and Chicago district where there's live play performances. And in 1903, in December, it was still the worst single building fire in American history. The Iroquois Theater fire took the lives of 602 people, including many children that were at a matinee performance just after Christmas on December 30th, 1903. And there were no ghost stories associated with this fire, but my ex-husband and I, Dave Cowan, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because he's all the great Chicago historian who chronicled the Our Lady of Angels School fire that we're going to talk about in a minute, also in December. And we wanted to make sure people knew about this story. So we would take them to the theater and we would take them down the alley and back. This is what the theater looked like when it opened in 1903. And this is what it looked like after the fire. The theater was touted as absolutely fireproof, but everything inside was totally flammable. And then there were so many things that went wrong. And a lot of it had to do with the corruption of the builders. And they were in cahoots with the fire inspectors and the city inspectors to open, even though the theater was not up to code. So it was absolutely horrible. It's a terrible, horrific tragedy in American history. There are two great books on this fire. One is called Tinderbox, and one is called, I think it's called The Theater Fire. And I'll look those up and I'll post them tomorrow on Facebook and Instagram. But this is the alley behind the Iroquois Theater where the fire was going on. And one of the worst things about the fire was that the fire escapes were not equipped to handle the massive numbers of people that were up in the upper levels, including the balcony. There were about 300 people up in the balcony, and they just couldn't get out. And so about 150 people fell or were pushed or jumped to their deaths in this alley, which is still today called Death's Alley. And like I said, this place wasn't even known to be haunted when we first started taking people on the tours here, but it wasn't long before we started to not only hear people, stories from people on the tours, but also from people in the theater that were working on shows there. And you can imagine that, you take a ghost tour in there and you tell them about that there's a fire, people are going to say, like they did, that they smell smoke, or that they hear screaming, or that they hear children's voices. But these touring companies that were coming into the building were telling us things that no one had ever heard before, which included things like that they would see and hear this like 14 or 15-year-old girl in a sparkly leotard running up and down the stairs behind the stage and then vanishing. They talked about smelling smoke. They talked about hearing little girls running around. Mostly they talked about the fact that when they were doing the shows, they would have to send the property master out into the alley to shut the children up that were making such a ruckus in the alley. They said that they would hear children running and screaming and playing in the alley behind the stage. And the property manager would go outside and there was absolutely nobody there. And this would happen over and over and over and over again. There was one property manager that told us that he had come out into the alley to smoke, and he sat outside the stage door, which is right here. And there was a woman that appeared dressed in turn of the century clothing that said to him, "The smoke will kill you." And he thought that she was in costume from one of the theater companies in the area, and that she was talking about him smoking a cigarette. And he laughed and kind of looked away for a second while he was laughing. And when he looked back, she was gone. The terrible, horrible fire at the Our Lady of Angels School. We commemorated this terrible anniversary again on December 1st. This fire is one of the worst disasters in American history. It led to the deaths of 90 children and 3 nuns at the Catholic school of Our Lady of the Angels Parish on the west side. This fire, as some of you know, has such a deep meaning for me because I met my husband while I was researching the ghost stories of this fire. My husband told me that my husband is David Cowan, who wrote the book To Sleep with the Angels, which should have been a Pulitzer Prize winning book, but I mean, it's one of the greatest history books in Chicago history and one of the greatest books about a fire. In fact, it's used by the National Fire Academy in Washington, D.C. to teach about, how fires work and things like that. But I met David because I was interviewing him in 1996 about whether there were ghost stories related to this fire. And he told me that he could have written an entire book about writing the fire. In fact, he said he was called, he believed by the Holy Spirit to write this book. Like he was from the neighborhood, but he didn't really think about the fire. But then from out of the blue, he was called, from somewhere, something to write this book. And I know that feeling as a historian, and it happens all the time where people with no interest in a subject will suddenly have this obsessive interest in this place or this event or this person, and just feel compelled to write and to reveal and research everything about it. So I had met with David and I interviewed him, and the stories that he told me that he had heard from people that had gone through this fire and survived this fire were so compelling. I'm going to share just one of those with you. There was a young man who was at the school with his sister. They were both attending the school, and the school was around Central Park and Division. This was 1958. The young man got out of his classroom right away, but he was looking, there was a huge crowd of people that had amassed while the firemen were going in and trying to rescue these kids, rescue the teachers. So everyone in the neighborhood was out on the street, and all of course the kids that had gotten out were frantic, looking around for their siblings, their cousins. Parents were looking for their kids, nieces, nephews, everything, grandchildren. And so this young man, he gets out and he's looking frantically around for his sister, and he can't find her and can't find her. And then he sees her walking down the alley behind the school towards their block. And he calls out to her, and she turns around and she said, I'm fine. I'm going home. Going home. So he was so relieved about his sister, and then he looked for a cousin of his and a friend of his that lived on the next block. And then he found his parents, and they were frantic because they couldn't find the sister. And he said, no, 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 I saw her. She said she was going home. So after they had made sure all of their other family members and neighbors were okay, they went home to check on the sister. And they got home and she wasn't there. And as the hours went by, and they were calling the neighbors and calling family members to see if the sister was there, and she wasn't there. So then they started to call the hospitals. There were, I think, 3 hospitals where the victims had taken, and she wasn't at any hospitals. And as it turned out, this girl had died. As you might know the story, a lot of the teachers, either not knowing what to do or to protect the kids from getting killed, trying to get out of the school, told their students to stay at their desks and pray. The sister was in one of these classrooms where the students were told to stay at their desks. She had died sitting at her desk in the classroom. And yet her brother had seen her going down the alley saying, I'm fine. I'm going home. That young man grew up to be a chief of police in one of the suburbs of Chicago, one of countless people I've encountered over 35 years that are, first responders, doctors, lawyers, teachers, professors, paleontologists, archaeologists that have seen these things, have experienced these things, and are, just flawless witnesses to these things that are real. They're absolutely real. And like I said, these are not the nicest, sweetest, coziest ghost stories in the annals of Christmas ghost stories, but there are Chicago Christmas ghost stories. And I think they, I don't know, they're very, very powerful stories. And I hope that you agree. I want to thank you so much for being here. And if you guys have any questions, we have a little small group. If you have any questions or comments, if you want to just unmute yourself and you can just comment. And if you don't want to, that's fine too. If you did like this presentation, I don't know if you've seen on Facebook, about a year ago, I started a mission in Pakistan to teach and free enslaved families, children and their families that are enslaved in the brick factories in Pakistan. We are working on freeing our 3rd family, and I just basically beg for money to do this. So we just freed a young man who's paralyzed, and his father. They just went free literally yesterday. And they don't need a lot of money to go free. They needed $500 that they were enslaved for, that they owed the brick factory owner. Our next family owes only $1,000. So anything that you can give is really going to go a long way to help. We post all about it on Facebook, so you can see the progress of everything. And if you want to donate, you can Zelle or Venmo me. I put the number in the chat for Venmo and Zelle, 773-733-2711. And every little bit helps. Your dollar is $5 in Pakistan, so it goes a huge, huge way. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to post this on Facebook tomorrow, so you can watch it again if you want to. And other than that, I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday and a blessed Merry Christmas. And I hope to see you. Do we have a question? Let me put my glasses on. Oh, thank you, Annie. Merry Christmas to you too. I appreciate you so much being here. Oh, Tommy, you're so sweet. Tommy always says I look beautiful. You're the best. Every girl needs Tommy. You guys have a wonderful night and a Merry Christmas. And I hope to see you in person down the road. Thank you so much. Take good care. Good night.